He told me I was crazy so many times, I almost started to believe him. That's the thing about gaslighting. It doesn't destroy you all at once. It's a slow dismantling, a quiet erosion of confidence until you start to question your own reflection. My name is Rena Calloway, and I spent 3 years loving a man who built his power out of my doubt. His name was Julian Morris, and Julian was charming, dangerously so. When we first met, he made the world feel cinematic. He had this way of talking that pulled people in, calm, deliberate, like he knew things no one else did. The night we met at a gallery opening, he'd leaned beside me, looking at a photograph of a rain-soaked street. Funny, he said, how something can look so peaceful when it's really chaos underneath. It was a perfect line, not too rehearsed, not too bold. I remember smiling, thinking, this one's different. For a while, I was right. He was attentive, clever, always saying the exact thing I didn't know I needed to hear. He brought me flowers just because, texted me good morning and good night, remembered the small things, the color of my coffee mug, the song I hummed when nervous. It felt like safety, until it didn't. The first time he called me crazy, it was almost gentle. We were at a friend's dinner party. I'd noticed him laughing with another woman, Lydia, one of those sleek, golden-haired types who always seemed to have a secret smile. Later, in the car, I asked him about it. "You were flirting," I said, careful, uncertain. He laughed, that calm, low laugh that made everything sound ridiculous. "Rena," he said, "you're being crazy." The way he said it, amused, indulgent, made me feel childish. I apologized. He kissed my forehead and said, "You overthink everything. You've got to relax." That was the first seed. Over the next year, the word became his weapon of choice. Whenever I asked where he'd been, "You're imagining things." When I found lipstick on his collar, "You're paranoid." When I said I felt distant from him, "You're too sensitive." He turned every argument into a performance. Him, the calm and logical one, me, the emotional mess. He never yelled. That was the genius of it. He just sighed, shook his head, and watched me unravel. And the cruelest part? He made me doubt myself enough to think he was right. There was a night, the one that changed everything, when I woke up at 2 a.m. and found him in the living room, phone glowing in his hand. He looked up too fast when I entered. "Couldn't sleep?" I asked softly. "Just checking work emails," he said. But I saw the name flash across his screen, Lydia. The next morning, he deleted his messages. I noticed because I'd started memorizing small things, icons, timestamps, the patterns of lies. When I asked about it, he smiled again. "You need to stop looking for problems, Rena. You're becoming obsessive." I laughed with him that time, because the alternative, believing my instincts, felt too terrifying. Gaslighting doesn't happen overnight. It happens in fragments, tiny distortions of reality until you start thinking the floor isn't solid anymore. I stopped seeing friends because he said they were bad influences. I stopped visiting my sister because she filled my head with nonsense. Eventually, my world shrank down to him, his moods, his opinions, his truth. And when someone becomes your only mirror, you forget what your own reflection looks like. It was a random Tuesday when I found proof. Julian was in the shower. His phone buzzed on the counter, a preview message lighting up the screen. "You always say she's crazy. Guess she's proving you right again." The name underneath made my blood freeze. Lydia. I didn't even need to open the phone. I just stood there, staring at that message, every lie he'd told me echoing in my mind like gunfire. He called her crazy too. It wasn't me, it was his script. I felt the room tilt. Years of gaslighting compressed into a single, nauseating moment of clarity. I wasn't insane. I was manipulated. And for the first time in years, I didn't feel small. I felt awake. That night, I printed everything. Every text, every email, every lie immortalized in black ink. The printer hummed in the quiet, each page sliding out like a revelation. His words, his own confessions, turning into my weapon. I didn't cry. Instead, I packed a small bag, folded the papers neatly, and waited for dawn. Julian left early for work every morning, always in the same routine: coffee, keys, car. But that morning, his car waited for me. I slipped outside just as the sun broke over the horizon. The street was still, the air sharp. I laid each page across his windshield, rows of truth like a crime scene display, messages to Lydia, photos, comments he thought were private, his entire mythology undone in ink. Then I tucked one final note beneath his wiper. It said, "You were right. I am crazy, but only forever loving you." By the time he found them, I was miles away. The first call came 10 minutes later, then another, then silence. He tried emails, voicemails, even messages through mutual friends. All the same tone of disbelief. "You're overreacting, Rena. Let's talk. You misunderstood." But I didn't misunderstand. For once, I understood everything. I turned off my phone somewhere along the highway, the city shrinking behind me. It felt like shedding skin. I drove until I reached the coast, a small, forgotten town with fog and gulls and no one who knew my name. I rented a tiny apartment above a bookstore. It smelled of paper and dust and salt water. Perfect. The first few nights were strange, too quiet. My mind still whispered the old refrains. "You're overreacting. You're too emotional." But each morning, the whispers faded a little more. I started walking along the beach at dawn, letting the wind slap color back into my face. I started reading again, cooking, breathing. It was like waking from anesthesia, painful, slow, but real. One afternoon, weeks later, I received a letter. No return address, but I recognized the handwriting immediately. Julian. I didn't want to open it, but I did, because closure isn't silence, it's confrontation. Inside were 2 pages. The first was an apology, cold, polished, detached. The kind of apology people write when they're trying to look remorseful without admitting guilt. The second page made me pause. It was a printed screenshot of an online forum, a post from Lydia. He said I was crazy. He said his ex made everything up. But now I know. It's his pattern, his favorite lie. Underneath, dozens of replies. Other women, same story, different names, same script. Julian's empire of gaslighting exposed. He'd built his control on isolation, and now the internet had turned his victims into a chorus. For the first time, I felt something close to justice. Not the courtroom kind, but the quiet satisfaction of knowing his words no longer worked. Months passed. I rebuilt. I started working as a freelance designer again, met people who saw me for who I was, not for how easy I was to manipulate. Sometimes I'd catch a glimpse of a man in a cafe who looked like him, and my chest would tighten. But it always eased when I remembered. I wasn't living in his shadow anymore. I'd learned to trust my own memory again, my own truth. And that was the deepest revenge of all. I think often about that morning, his face when he saw the papers on his car. I wasn't there to witness it, but I can picture it vividly. Him standing in the cold, eyes scanning line after line of his own betrayal, realizing the script had flipped. For once, there was no one left to convince. That image keeps me grounded, not because I hate him, but because it reminds me of the moment I reclaimed my voice. Gaslighters don't just steal your trust, they rewrite your story. They make you doubt your memories, your reactions, your sanity, until you exist only in their version of reality. But there's something they never understand. Once you see the truth, you can't unsee it. And when you finally walk away, they're left shouting into a void that doesn't answer back. A year later, I heard he'd moved to another city. A mutual friend mentioned he was starting over. I smiled at that. Gaslighters always think they can start over, as if the past doesn't follow them. But truth has a way of finding its audience. And in the age of screenshots and shared stories, even the most careful manipulators eventually watch their own lies echo back. Sometimes people ask me if I regret leaving without confrontation, no shouting match, no face-to-face finale, and I tell them no, because the beauty of poetic revenge is that it doesn't need volume, it just needs truth, placed in the right light. He built his world on distortion. I tore it down with clarity. Now, when I look in the mirror, I don't see the woman he called crazy. I see the woman who refused to let someone else narrate her sanity. And maybe that's the real end to every gaslighting story. Not the exposure, not the revenge, but the reclamation. The moment you realize that your memory, your emotions, your truth were never the problem. He was. I left the city that morning thinking I'd lost everything, but what I really left behind was the only thing that ever needed to go. His voice inside my head.
You've just stepped into her revenge side, where every wound finds its justice, and every silence ends with truth. If her story struck a chord, make sure to like, share, and subscribe. Your support keeps these stories alive. Another secret waits in the next video. See how her revenge begins.